welcome to the DualShockers ShockCast. We're doing a special episode here of our podcast. We're doing a God of War Spoilercast, and joining me for this recording, we have Michael Ruiz.
Boy!
I knew that was coming.
Jesus Christ.
Tanner Pierce.
Hi.
And Tomas Franzisi.
Hi.
Oh no! So we only got one boy out of that. So so yeah, we're doing a spoiler cast for God of War because pretty much the majority of the DualShocker staff have been playing this game. Now that it's been a couple weeks out and we've all had a chance to kind of finish it and digest it. So now we kind of want to go into and share, some of the big story moments from the game, what we think of it, and all that. Obviously, this goes without saying that this is going to be very, very spoiler heavy. So if you've not played this game, do not listen to this podcast until after you've finished. With that said, who's beeping? Tanner, is that you? With that said, we're gonna jump right into it. So let's just kind of go first through our initial sort of thoughts and reactions to God of War and how it's different from the previous games in the series. So Michael, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have almost zero experience with any of the God of Wars from before. I played some of Ascension before, and it was not that great. I played Chains of Olympus too, and I mean that one was fine. Mm-hmm. But I don't really have this strong tie to the series whatsoever. More or less, I was more interested in the change of scenery of he's going into Greek mythology or into Norse mythology instead of Greek mythology and stuff like that. It looks like a nice game. It looked really pretty and stuff like that. From that, I was like, oh, this looks cool. I want to try this out. But yeah, my initially do you want to know my initial thoughts when I was playing it, or when just in general when I saw it revealed?
Just in general, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I thought it just looked pretty cool, and I was interested in it. And I guess when playing it, I was kind of just initially was not into it, and then later on, it clicked at one point, and we'll talk about that later probably. But it clicked at a certain point, and my view of it changed complete 180. And I think it's one of the best games to have come out on the PS4 now. So
awesome. Yeah. Tanner, what do you think?
I was one of those people that was completely blown away. Completely blown away when it was revealed at E3. By how different it looked. Mm-hmm. And I knew just by that it was going to be something special. And then, of course, when I started playing it, all my thoughts were completely just reaffirmed. I mean, it's just a masterpiece on every level. I really have no complaints about it. I mean, it even got me to like RPG mechanics, which is something that's hard for me to like. So, mm-hmm. But I mean, it's just I think the thing that it does so well is it's just so different than everything that came before it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Tomas, what do you think?
Well, I have not really played the previous entries in the God of War series. A few years ago, it's such a kind of a funny story. There was some sale at GameStop, and I bought the God of War collection and all three of the Uncharted games for PS3. Mm-hmm. Tanner, are you typing?
No.
Okay. Okay. So I bought the three Uncharted games and the God of War collection on PS3, and I brought it up to the guy, and he's like, "Oh, the Nathan Drake collection and God of War on 3 on PS4 are coming," and he kept on trying to sell me the new games because I was buying them for $20 on the PS3. And he's like, "No, spend 120," and I was like, "Yeah, no." But I really after that only played most of the first game, and it's the series is it was slightly before when I really got into gaming was when it was huge. Mm-hmm. So I was an Xbox gamer growing up, so I never really had the chance to fully jump into the series, but I was always curious how it would make that jump from PS3 to PS4 especially because the God of War 3, I am familiar with the story. I knew it ended on kind of a cliffhanger. And when I heard that just on Twitter that oh yeah, the new one's coming and it's Norse mythology, probably, I got pretty excited because I'm a fan of Norse mythology, and that got revealed and it looked super good, and they were pretty secretive about it up until launch, and then I picked it up a couple days after, and I was super impressed. I have a couple minor complaints, but it's it's the best game I've played this year.
Yeah, I'm with you on the minor complaints, but yeah, like any complaint that I would have is just sounds so like ridiculous, I guess. But yeah, like there's little things here and there, but otherwise it's like pretty perfect. Not perfect, but it's great.
I will say, like, one of the, just to go back to like the whole like when it was revealed thing, like one of the best experiences I've ever had is going to the theater E3 experience thing, and where they show E3 in a theater, and watching the crowd flip out over it. Kratos that was one of the best like experiences I've ever had. Like that was so cool to see that there was this love for this series that, you know, if you look back on the first three, it's like, oh, they're okay. But like when you see this revealed, it's like, oh my god!
A lot of people would disagree with you there.
They're
very popular.
I think
they are popular, but it's just like I do see all the time of I guess now it's like, oh well, this is so much better that these are like just inferior. I guess I see that a lot. And it kind of
before Batman Arkham Asylum, it's kind of the game that influenced like the kind of action beat 'em up genre with its gameplay. Like there's a ton of clones. Like I mean, some of them are good, like Dante's Inferno, and then like a lot of games like Golden Axe like tried to rip it off, and they were kind of bad. So I mean, it did have a huge influence, which is also why I think they did need to radically change it up when they went to next gen, which they did, because it was so because it's been so done what the previous games did. Yeah, that they needed that change of pace.
And I think with what Tanner was saying about when they revealed this game, so obviously this game got revealed at E3 2016 at Sony's conference, and I like personally, I think this is like maybe one of my favorite reveals ever. Like and not just at a Sony conference, but like just in general, because like the way that because that was when they had the orchestra playing and they were doing the God of War. It was just so epic, and it just fit. And it was just funny because like when they show the trailer, like the first thing you see is like Atreus and sort of the setting and stuff like that. So you don't know it's God of War right away, even though I'm sure most people probably figured it was God of War. But just then like that whole build up, and you see Kratos come out and he has a beard, he's older, like it just, but there's still that sort of connection to the previous games in the series. It was just like such a cool way to reveal that game. And like so I guess going into sort of my reactions and thoughts of the game, so it's interesting that you guys mostly have not played a lot of the previous games, because I've played all of them, including Betrayal, which is the flip phone game that came out in the mid 2000s. So I played that too. So I played all the games, and I've always appreciated God of War. Like I think it's fun and entertaining, and like just the way that they have done action and spectacle over the last like 2 generations of games has been awesome. But you know, like a lot of people have complained about, is that the story and the character development and everything games has been pretty non-existent. Like there's really, Kratos is a very one-note character, and I think that when they revealed God of War, like it was really everything I could have hoped for them to take with the series. So just a couple things I know that like I want to sort of touch on as we do this podcast is how like basically this game sort of serves as like a soft reboot of God of War compared to what we saw from the previous games. And the big changes are the change from Greek to Norse mythology in the setting. There's the father-son dynamic between Kratos and Atreus, which kind of puts Kratos into a new role that we haven't seen him in before. The combat and the gameplay is completely different, and there is more of an emphasis in this game on storytelling and character development. So let's just kind of go down those things really quick. So first thing, the change in setting from the Greek mythology to Norse setting. What did you guys think about that? What were your reactions to it?
Upset that Chris Hemsworth didn't show up.
That's something interesting. I think that that I was kind of wondering in this game is how much of people's perception of Norse mythology would be impacted by things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and sort of these other tellings of Norse mythology. Because it's like, on one hand, there are some things that are fairly similar, like character names and stuff, but just their depictions of them in this game are completely different.
Oh yeah, especially because most people, like, if you're not like kind of into this stuff, like I am, it's more like you really only know it from Marvel recently,
right?
And like the Thor movies. And so I think like a lot of people, you know, you have these like conceptions of like Thor being this really cool good guy and Loki being kind of his like mischievous brother. And so and Odin being like kind of like a weird but loving father. So when this game kind of turns up and is like, yeah, no, they all suck.
Yeah, and this is something we'll get into later on as we discuss story stuff. But like Thor's kind of seems like a dick in this game, so it's like
I mean, you don't see him, you only see Baldur, which surprised me, but I expected that because I mean, even in the first God of War, I don't believe you don't fight, like you really just fight Ares and a couple other gods. But yeah, so I do wish there were maybe like one or two more smaller ones, but like I also really liked Baldur's arc and how it ended up playing into the whole parenting theme in the end. But yeah, so
yeah, I it was funny because when Baldur originally shows up, I thought it was Loki. Because of my preconception of a skinny kid, or a skinny guy, really lanky, powerful, and I'm just like, oh, is that supposed to be Loki, and is that going to be like the twist later on? And then it's like, oh no, it's Baldur, and I'm like, who's that? And I had to go on the computer and I looked up. I'm like, and I looked up who Baldur was and learned all this stuff about Norse mythology that, I thought, my only, I guess you could say, I've only been influenced by the MCU for the Norse mythology stuff, and it was, which is obviously, that's obviously terrible. But
it's not accurate.
It's not accurate at all.
It's Baldur is in the comics. He's not in the movies though, in the Marvel universe. But
really?
I mean, so I understand. Like I said, like most people are familiar with this from the Thor movies. So like, of course, when it deviates, it changes things up.
Yeah, no, and it was a nice dichotomy to see all of them being assholes instead of just one clear like good and bad, like black and white type thing. It was all kind of like, oh yeah, no, they're all assholes.
that kind of fits into the theme of the whole series though, because I mean, like I said, I've played, but I am familiar with like the stories throughout them. Like none of the gods have really been that good. Like even the technical good guys or whatever, like Kratos and Athena, are still like pretty crappy like people.
And I mean, Athena's the best, but even she's just like.
But that's actually rooted in a lot of like, if you go back and you look at a lot of these like kind of mythologies, it's really a bunch of kind of tragic stories or like people getting screwed over and stuff constantly is what they're about. And so if you look at that and you think that if these gods were actually like living people, they'd be pretty miserable because of all the like crap they had to go through.
Yeah, it's probably why it's like why the Norse mythology like seemed like such a good transition from Greek mythology, because there's just a lot of sort of similar, like you said, that sort of like tragic storylines and things like that.
Yeah, and then the last game, or in like the first trilogy, like how they kind of adapted in that to like, oh, they all suck, kill them all.
Yeah.
This one they were kind of showing the more emotional side of it, where it's like Kratos is like a shitty god, and he knows like he's a really bad person, and he doesn't want his son to be, even though his son is technically a god. So it's kind of him struggling with that he doesn't want to. He wants his son to be better than him, but every god he's ever known has been a dick or betrayed him.
Yeah.
So,
and Michael, I know you're kind of working on a piece about Norse mythology in this game and all that. So did you have anything else you wanted to add about just sort of what you thought of how it was depicted in this game?
I just feel like that. Like I wouldn't say that any of them. So I mean, I like you guys were saying, like a lot of like God of War has to do with like them just like gods just being dicks, and then Kratos just not trusting them. And I don't know. I think I haven't done too much digging, but for a lot of it, it doesn't seem like anyone's necessarily a bad guy or good guy. Like even Loki, who's usually depicted as like a bad guy, has done good things for them.
Right.
And it's somebody that it's more of like somebody that they put up with rather than somebody that that they hate or despise or something like that. So it just becomes a thing of like, I don't know, like, I don't know. I don't know. I again, I'm like not too deep into it all so far, but I think this one takes more of like a negative turn than anything of like, oh, all these guys are just a bunch of assholes. Like, screw these guys, like just kill them all kind of thing. That's how I took it, at least.
Yeah.
And I feel like in like Norse mythology, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Tomas, it sounds like you know this stuff a little bit more than I would, because I am also one who really just knows it from comic books, but like it doesn't seem like any of them are necessarily like bad or good.
Yeah,
It's like it's just, you know.
Most gods or like god figures are kind of like that, where like you look up to them because they're these beings of not to go like all theology on you, but
Sure.
like you're looking up to these beings of like massive power, and they can do these great things, so a lot of great stories. But there's also just as many negative stories because people also use religion for like cautionary tales and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you get these stories that come up of like gods messing up or doing terrible things, and it's like, oh, that's why like something like there's winters every year or something like that, just like depending on the mythology, like, and there's like a tragic story behind that. So those were originally crafted to kind of so people can make sense of those things. But then now in a modern age where we have science and all that stuff and we can look back on it, there's actually a lot of really emotional story potential there, which I think this game takes and runs with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think like people like Thor or Baldur are usually considered like good guys.
Yes.
In there, and like Baldur is, I think, is like probably one of the best guys, I think, in Norse mythology, if I'm right. But like he is, and he's a story. He's actually like my favorite character in the game. Like I loved his arc. I thought it was great, and I thought it was like very well acted, and I liked his reasoning for everything. But yeah, he's like a kind of like a different character than from what I've read in like Norse mythology. I think the people at Sony Santa Monica like took their iteration and like did something different with like Norse mythology and stuff. I think it was really good.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite things with the change to the Norse mythology is just like it kind of added a sense of danger and unpredictability that I don't think we got from the previous games, because like we've had 6-7 games of Greek mythology, so like, and Kratos has pretty much just trounced all the different god enemies and gods that have been thrown against him and stuff like that. But because in this game he's in sort of unfamiliar territory that he doesn't know what's around, I think that it added a little bit more suspense for me kind of playing through this game. Like
definitely.
Definitely with the troll fight in the very beginning, or like the stranger fight, like it was just these things that you didn't really know where they were going to go, because he's kind of dealing with these unfamiliar forces to him compared to fighting the Greek enemies and gods that we've faced before.
Yeah,
definitely. That's probably something the series hasn't seen since the first entry, because I mean, once you start to enter Greek mythology, which I would say people are more familiar with than
I was just
Norse
about to say that. Yeah, I was gonna say this is way more familiar territory than Norse mythology for sure.
Yeah. So I feel like once they were you could kind of see where we're going, where it's like, okay, he killed Ares, he's the god of war. Well, what's the next step? Like, okay, the Titans and Zeus, like he's going to go and just work his way up. And because the stories in those games were pretty straightforward and not the most like emotional, you know what I mean? It was kind of a simple path where it's just like, okay, how many like Greek figures can we get him to kill, instead of like this game, which kind of plays it slower but kind of immerses you in the world more.
Yeah. So I think the next thing I kind of want to move on to is the father-son dynamic between Kratos and Atreus, which is, I would say, arguably kind of the centerpiece of this game. And, just sort of from a storytelling standpoint, from a character standpoint, because obviously in this game we're seeing Kratos, a much older Kratos compared to when we saw him at the end of God of War 3. He's kind of trying to lay low, build a new life for himself. And then obviously Atreus is the sort of the main sort of sidekick for him as his son, and it's it's interesting in this game to see him trying to fit this fatherly role, which he's really not familiar. I mean, he to the extent he is, because of his daughter from the previous game and his wife, but this is also coming way after all of the things he's been through in the previous games. So what do you guys think about just how they incorporated Kratos and Atreus into this game?
Yeah, well, I think there was a lot of rape potential there, because there's kind of that past where he knows he murdered his like wife and daughter, and it's one of the like the biggest things that haunts him to this day, and is why he hates gods. And so he looks at his son, and I think part of him's just like, I don't want to do that again. And so that's why I think he was super distant from his son in this childhood, from what at least is kind of implied, is because he's like, if I'm around too much, maybe I'll snap again and kill him. But then because the mom dies, she and makes him chop down the trees to break the barrier, she kind of forces him to bond and go on this journey.
Right, yeah, and I think because there's just to touch on that point you mentioned that like there's a lot of points where Kratos kind of says to Atreus like when Atreus says like oh I'm sorry when he mixes up or he screws something up, Kratos says no, don't be sorry, be better. And I think that's the type of thing that he's not only saying to Atreus but also to himself to sort of definitely sort of reflecting on his past and the mistakes he's done and how he's trying to teach Atreus to be a better person but also be better than what Kratos kind of became.
Yeah, I was surprised too at like how much the themes of like parenting and that kind of stuff came into play. Because I mean, I expected it from what I had seen, but I mean, I didn't even know until I picked it up, and it just kept on dropping these like parenting truth bombs with all these characters, where you're just kind of like sitting there and like, holy crap! After several moments in the story, and then you get to see some like real emotion from Kratos when Atreus gets sick and stuff like that. Like I still remember, I know this is kind of getting off topic, but like when he gets sick at that one point in the story, he looks up at what was it, Frigga? Was that who she was?
Freya.
Yeah.
Freya. Yeah, he looks up at Freya at one point, and you can actually see the sadness on Kratos' face, and it's like I was just that kind of like made me take it back because he's someone who's like always just been stern and he's kind of emotionalist and stoic in his face. But then so to see him, and he's like, you can tell he genuinely cares for his son, but he sometimes has trouble showing it due to his troubled past. And I mean, like, and also I think the reason the father-son dynamic works is just because, like, even like myself, like I have a much more functional relationship with my father. Like we're very loving family and everything, but there's something as like a son or as a father. I think you can look at this game and kind of find bits or pieces that you can relate to. Where you're kind of like, oh yeah, I felt that as a kid before. Like a parent could be like, oh yeah, I like kind of felt bad or like wanted to do this with my children before. So I think the story becomes super relatable at that point, even if with how fantastical it is, it can kind of hit you with like that relation through the father-son dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael or Tanner, do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, like I thought again, like this is a game that like kind of hit me more like later on at later parts of the game. So like in the beginning parts of like where it's them really like I guess bonding in their own special way, I suppose. Like I thought it was like super hokey, like the whole floaty hand thing that Kratos does. Like he wants to pat him on the back or whatever, or like make him feel comfortable or something, and then he doesn't, but because he wants to just be big strong man or whatever. And like I thought that kind of stuff was kind of hokey in the beginning, but I think later on when Atreus gets like the real big ego when he finds out he's a god, I hated him at that point. I could not stand Atreus. Like I wanted to, I don't know. I felt like I was like, oh my god, if this was my child, Jesus. But yeah, like that at that point, like that was when I was like, when Kratos was like, oh, like you can't be like don't be like this kind of person. You can't like, whatever, all that stuff. Like I felt like more connected to like those parts of the stories. And I don't know why. Like I just felt like that those were more like realer conversations than like, him just being like, oh, do better and all that stuff. Like
those are conversations that like an actual father and son could have in like the real world in a way, like under different circumstances.
It was more like the kid was having an ego because he found out he's a god, he can survive forever or whatever.
He was being a rowdy teenager, and
exactly.
Kratos
was just being like, "Yo, you got to chill out a little bit. You're getting like over your head and stuff like that." And those were the conversations that I personally liked, even though I seriously could not stand Atreus like during those. I could not stand him.
I really like Atreus was a character I thought that at first I was not really gonna enjoy, just because like I mean by his nature, like it seemed like, oh, he's gonna be an annoying little kid and just be obnoxious throughout the game. But I actually really loved in this game how they gave him different emotions and things like that, like you guys kind of touched on as like throughout this game. I think especially one of my favorite moments in this game, there's the part where Atreus is trying to get the chain down or whatever, and you use those like button commands to command him to go and like get the chain. But there's the one where he's like not listening to you, so it takes a couple times for you to like, you know, he'll go over to the chain, then he'll like be like, oh, all right, I'll do this, I guess. And like I think that the ways that they sort of fleshed out his character through the gameplay and through those moments, I thought was really, really effective.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites in particular. But then there were also the moments like when you defeat the troll and he's slashing at the troll like over and over again in a rage, you know, but then Kratos is, you know, kind of pushing him back a little bit and be like, hey, you gotta chill a little bit.
Because he sees himself there, and he's like, oh no, when I went down that path, I doesn't stop. So, like I said, even though his son's a god, he doesn't want him to be, because he knows like the hardship, and especially being his son, he knows it can lead him down a violent path. So that's why he kind of shut him off, and it's like, okay, we're not going on the journey, because he didn't want that to happen to his son. But then because they cut down the trees, the force field broke, and they had to go. So,
absolutely, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna say that also kind of shows like when he does get that ego, and I think is it Modi that he kills?
Yeah, I think so. One of the twins.
He kills one of them, and then I don't know, I can't remember the exact turn of events, but like they end up in hell again, and they're like on the wrong side of hell, and like Kratos is just like, oh, this is all your fault, and then that's where that's the turning point of Atreus being like, oh yeah, I was being a real big jerk. So like trying not to swear too much, but yeah, like, you know, like he was just being a real big jerk, and that's what like his like, oh yeah, I shouldn't be this, you know, egotistical piece of garbage. I should just, you know, take things into stride, I guess, and be a better person than the people that they are fighting against.
Atreus, what an egotistical piece of garbage. No, but I will say, like, the whole father-son dynamic, that was one of the things where it was probably the most predictable part of the game, mostly because I knew, I'm like, oh, well, I know from the trailers and from the plot that they are obviously estranged at the beginning of the game. They don't have a relationship. I'm like, and I bet you $10 by the end of the game, everything's fine. And there was the one point where I was thrown off by that was when he starts becoming like a cocky asshole. And after it went on for a while, I honestly thought, I'm like, am I going to have to end with fighting Atreus? Like, is that how that's going to end? I'm like, no, they wouldn't do that. I'm like, would they? And it had me questioning it, but it did.
I mean, they still could.
Yeah, they still could, but yeah, no, especially with the reveal at the end. But that ended just as I predicted it would, but it was still done really, really well. Like, even though I predicted how it was going to end, they still did it as perfectly as they could, honestly. So I really
predicted that he was going to be Loki.
No, not that he was going to be Loki. No, the father-son that it's called a spoiler cast. Come on. No, not that he was going to be Loki, but the just the whole father-son dynamic in general, about how it started as, they have a bad relationship, and I kind of figured that it would be fixed by the end of the game in some way, shape, or form. But no, the Loki twist, oh my god, I saw that coming out of nowhere. Like we'll talk about that later on, I'm sure, but that just took me by a complete surprise.
Yeah, and I think actually one thing that's interesting with what Tanner said about Atreus fighting Kratos is one of the storylines that I kind of hoped that God of War would maybe eventually down the line go into, is that, like, basically having Kratos become like the ultimate God of War, and then like playing as another the player playing as another character that has to take down Kratos. And I thought that might be a direction that they might eventually go into, because I feel like thematically it would work, because that was kind of what you were doing throughout the whole other games, was Kratos taking down all these other gods. And eventually, why not have another character trying to take down Kratos because he's become all-powerful or something like that. So
I do think the series is headed in that direction, like whether it's in like God of War 5 or 6 or whatever they decide to do with the series. Like, I mean, I could actually see, like, if you're following regular 3-act structure, Kratos would die at the end of the second game, and then the third game would be Atreus. Yeah. But, so that's something I can definitely see him doing. But, I mean, when you're reviving the series, they kind of needed Kratos in the Sentry. So
yeah, absolutely. I kind of had a suspicion like maybe Kratos would die in this game, like, but I guess it makes sense that like to continue building on what they've established with this game that they, and we'll go on to we'll get into this later on in the podcast, but you know, like I guess it does make sense that they didn't want to necessarily kill him off in this game. So with all that said, let's move on now from the story and sort of character stuff. We'll move into the actual like the combat and the gameplay, because obviously just as much as the story stuff in this game, there's been a lot of changes to the kind of fundamentals of how this game works, because you know, God of War in the previous games was very sort of arcadey almost, the way that the combat worked. And, you know, it's very surprising, I think, to see how they basically changed it. They basically turned this game into God of Dark Souls, is like more or less. It's like, it's very similar. It's much
journalism there.
It's much. Well, I haven't said that God of War is the Dark Souls of God
agree.
of War.
I agree with you. Yeah, I'm just messing with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the most immediate comparison that people are going to have to this game, because the combat is way slower and heavier, but also because it has more of an action RPG sort of mentality to it.
Yeah. It's like I think it's more of a, I mean, I know I might piss off some From Software fans saying this, but I think it's a more mainstream Dark Souls. It's kind of that same formula, but it is a little more forgiving. I mean, the game still gets very difficult in a couple areas.
Yeah.
So
but but it's kind of, it's more accessible where you can, I mean, the game's sold over like 3 million copies at this point. So like,
yeah,
it's something with more mass appeal like that people will pick up, and then it kind of has this more methodical but still like action-packed and rewarding gameplay. And as actually somebody who's not always the biggest fan of the Souls series or the Souls games, like I actually did like how this did things a little bit more, just because of, like I said, when I don't want to say more casual, but like it did kind of roll things back to a more traditional kind of, like it was a more mainstream Dark Souls basically. And so I think that gives that whole genre a broader appeal. And I know, like, and I do hate comparing stuff to Dark Souls, because I think it's a really
everyone compares
comparison,
it,
just because people will be like, oh, this game's hard, it's like Dark Souls, when Dark Souls is actually much more about being methodical and learning. And I think that's what would make something like Dark Souls. So I think it took those elements, like the good elements, and put it into a slightly easier, more mainstream experience with a really emotional story, and everything just came together and worked out.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, like, initially, like, I wasn't huge on the combat, because I felt like I was just swinging an axe. Like, I didn't feel like there was anything, like, when you play like a game, like, because I've played a couple of the God of War games, like, I like the idea of like having like the button combination stuff, kind of like a Devil May Cry kind of thing, I guess too.
Yeah,
it's still there though.
And it's still there. Yeah, I think it's still there, but it wasn't there in the very beginning. Like, you're just pressing I felt like you were just pressing the R1 button the entire time. For like those first like 3 hours or so. But like once it opens up a little bit more, I think a lot of the skill tree stuff, and once you get the different what are those like upgrade things where like you can make like time slow down or something, like I can't remember exactly. There's like some
the
like
runics?
the
runic attacks,
once you get like the runic attacks and stuff like that, and like once Atreus can start like shooting a bow, and you can use that too as a way to like kind of manage the crowd, do some crowd control while you're doing that. Like I think it opens up in like a really great way. But initially, like, I was not huge on it for sure.
Well, you got to kind of wean people into it too.
Yeah, and that's something that I understood once I was like, oh, I get it. They were trying to teach me how to do all this stuff like piece by piece by piece. And I understood that. It was just like initially I was like, I don't see what people are saying about this combat, but then I saw it like once I was like about 5 hours in or so.
Yeah.
So
I do love the combat. My one complaint does come from the combat though with the game. It's that I think the combat's amazing, and it's almost like a Thor game with how it works. When you're fighting stuff directly in front or behind you, and I think even when stuff's behind you, you have the quick turn, and so it makes you feel really badass. But I feel like this system does not work, or its faults start to show whenever you have to fight something that either moves really fast or flies, because the system's not built for that. Because I feel like basically you can't attack anything on your sides really until you get the chains, and so you're either like basically directly in front or directly behind you. And I feel like the most of the game does a really good job at managing that and creating challenges that like crafted around that. But then towards the end, when you're fighting some of the really powerful Dark Elves and the Valkyries in the post game, I feel like the flaws start to show, because these are characters that can fire projectiles from across the screen behind you, and you can't see it on the little counter bar because your camera's aimed upwards, and there isn't really a good way to see that. So I just feel like those fights kind of, just for the sake of difficulty, we're like, oh, we're gonna make you fight a super powerful flying enemy, not noticing that kind of breaks the system. And so, I think the game does a really good job of working within its excellent gameplay's limits. I feel like towards the end of the game, when they really want to start pumping up the difficulty, I do feel like it gets a little cheap in a couple areas because it isn't really built for aerial combat.
Yeah, like the elves were easily my least favorite enemies, because they just move so fast, and like trying to like, you know, because throwing the axe is not necessarily the fastest process. Like you have to aim, you have to throw, it takes a little bit to hit, and like it just, they like a lot of times I would line up the shot and hit and throw the axe, and they would, you know, dart away immediately and miss. Or like the witches especially, I think were kind of frustrating, because it was like first you have to shoot them with the arrows first to kind of stun them, then hit them with the axe. And
I think that was a little more manageable though, because like they were still kind of, they weren't in the air, they were directly in front of you.
They were,
so those were kind of like pushing it the most with like what the system could do. But yeah, like I agree with the elves. Like once you kind of put flying and projectiles into the mix, like it with an enemy that moves super fast, it kind of, the cracks start to show.
Yeah.
So I'd say if I had like one major complaint besides like occasional frame rate stutters when coming out of a sleep mode, it'd be that. But the game, for the most part, even when it comes to gameplay, is absolutely amazing. I also found it weird that you use the B button for platforming, but I got used to that quick.
Oh, that's actually, I was gonna say,
not B, circle.
The B button.
So I actually, that's actually one thing I didn't think of it too. Is what control settings did you guys use? Did you use the classic or like the default settings?
The default. I use the default.
Default because it was easier to aim.
Okay, because I switched to the classic controls, which basically changes it to what the previous God of War games were. Because I think my main thing is I really don't like using melee attacks on triggers. Like it just doesn't feel right to me. Like I prefer using the face buttons. So that felt better to me when I was playing the game using the face buttons. But yeah, aiming was a little bit harder, I think, because it just wasn't like you weren't able to transition right away. And I will say though, like I know what Tomas said, like I think the combat, like I love the combat overall. I thought it was great, and I think it was like, it does feel like Dark Souls, but with a little bit more leniency to it, because especially like when it comes to blocking, you have such a wide window of like blocking an enemy attack. But I really don't think it works well when you're fighting things on your sides or behind you. Like even though there's the quick turn, like I really did not use the quick turn at all.
Yeah,
I usually just try to dodge around, and
it makes things a lot easier if you can. I know it's at a weird, like especially on the classic controls, but like if you use it, combat actually becomes a lot more dynamic and easier, because you can hit something in front of you a couple times, stun it, quick turn, hit what's behind you, roll, and then like there's more advanced stuff you can do once you take advantage of the quick turn. But I do understand that, because like down on the D-pad is not the best place.
Yeah, it was I think if it was in a better button placement, it might have worked better, but I just like, if it felt like it was a solution and it was there, I just don't know if it was like the ideal way to sort of address that problem. But otherwise, like aside from those things that we've sort of pointed out, like overall I thought that the combat was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed doing it, and especially as you kind of unlock new skills later on. Like I think probably one of my favorites is that attack if you hold down the heavy button, and Kratos does that kind of execution move that just can kill most of the lower leveled enemies in like one hit and just chop their head off. Like that was just so satisfying to use all the time.
The only thing that I didn't like about that, like when you press it, are you talking about when you press in like the R3 button or whatever?
I think for class it was for me it was triangle for the heavy attack. Like if you hold it down, he'll like charge up and then like cleave a guy in half.
Yeah, it's like when they show like the reds, like it turns like a red circle over them or something like that.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, like the only thing that I had a problem with that was that I think the animations were way too long.
And they got very repetitive too.
I ran into a couple glitches with that too. Like I would pick up a guy and run into a wall, and then Kratos would just like keep going onto a pile of rocks and get stuck. I literally got stuck in an animation one time because I did it into like a corner with some rocks.
Yeah, I think the only one of those I didn't like were the ones where you did like the charge attack, where you just like run infinitely into an enemy enemy until like eventually it like gives out. That one was I wish there was a way to stop it earlier. And also that and the one where you do on the little troll enemies where you like hop on their back and they like charge and hit guys, like that one also was kind of like annoying to do over and over again.
There was stuff like that in the original God of War, right?
There was
so they kind of had to put that in there, I think.
I'm just thankful
from a design standpoint.
I'm glad that they took out because in the old God of War games when you had to do the button prompts, they used to have the half circle, like the control where you used to have to rotate the controller stick certain ways, and those were so frustrating because half the time they just never worked right. And so I'm glad that they took those out of this game.
They took the David Cage QTs out. Okay.
There's still quick time events in this game, but I feel like they're significantly less like
it's
less
usually
crazy.
just like mash the B button or something.
No, they toned them down a lot in this game, which I thought was good.
Well, because people are also like God of War is one of the games that popularized them. So
absolutely,
and because there's such a hated element in games nowadays. Like I do think like when they came to design this, they were probably like, okay, we still need to put some in there because it's the series, but let's tone them back.
My one last thing I'll say about the combat and stuff though too is that like I think like when I first started playing the game or whatever, I literally spent a good like 10-15 minutes just throwing the Leviathan axe around and seeing how the system works. Because like I just like that system felt so good. Like they made it feel so bad. And I know a lot of people said it's like basically Thor and the hammer. But just the way that they made that feedback feel, it felt so good. I literally I would literally just throw the axe as far as I could and just to see how long it would take for like the axe to come back, and like it was a lot of fun.
I'm sure Square Enix is probably like, crap, they stole our Thor gameplay
for their Avengers game.
And there's actually another game coming out called Rune. That is like based off Norse mythology, and it's kind of a Dark Souls style. Like it's very similar to God of War in concept.
Yeah.
I feel like this game probably came out and Human Head was probably like, oh no.
Oh no.
They took our idea.
But it was pretty funny. I don't know.
Tanner, did you have anything else you wanted to add about like the combat and stuff? Or
I mean, I for me, gameplay is secondary in a lot of ways to the story. That being said, this was the first title one of the first titles that made me just go back to a story-based game and just screw around for hours because the gameplay is just so much fun and there's so much variety to the way you can go and attack enemies. I mean, one of the things I just love doing is going into an area and saying, all right, I'm going to take down enemies only using this specific way. And I'll say like, all right, light axe throws only. And I'll just try and do that, and it's just so much fun to do that because the gameplay is so, dare I say, perfect. I mean, I don't think a lot of things in gaming and movies are perfect, but the combat is it's a masterpiece, just like everything else about the game.
When it clicks, it really clicks.
And I think one of the things they did really well too, I think, is that like, and we're gonna go into this in a little bit, but when you do get the Blades of Chaos back and you get to use those, I appreciate that, like, even though the Blades of Chaos are pretty powerful and I think they do kind of solve a lot of the issues of the combat that we kind of pointed out earlier. They did a good job of making them feel distinct enough from the axe that like it didn't feel like, oh, now that I have the Blades of Chaos, I don't have to ever use the axe again. Like the axe still felt like it still had its own unique purposes in combat and sort of exploration that made it essential to have, and then it wasn't just like, well, I have the Blades of Chaos, so now I don't need to use the axe anymore. Like I still switched between both weapons like pretty consistently.
Yeah, also, I gotta say that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No. One thing I was saying too. That one thing. I was a little afraid when I first got them that they would make it play exactly like the original God of Wars, which wouldn't work in this style of this style of game. So I was kind of happy that they adapted to them. So it still kind of felt like the old games, like because I did play a little bit of the older ones, but like so it still kind of felt like that, but it adapted it to the new control scheme and gameplay style.
Right. Yeah.
But like when you first get them in the story, that whole section, oh my god, that whole section when you first get the Blades of Chaos is
we're gonna
you weren't in control though. You just kind of sat on a boat for like 5 minutes.
We're gonna
go away, Athena.
It was setting the scene because you can tell something is coming and you just
definitely
don't know what it is.
Well, I think that's actually
it was. It was great. I'm just making fun of it.
Yeah. Let's start to move into the story stuff now, so we can kind of dig into that. So obviously, the story in this game, the sort of main plot is that Kratos is, this is well after God of War 3, when Kratos essentially killed all of the Greek gods and devastated Greece. So now he's kind of trying to lay low and build a new life for himself. And it's interesting, I think, that we see that like we're picking up from Kratos's wife, what was her, Faye was her name. So we're picking up when Faye has passed away. We're introduced to him and Atreus as they're trying to climb the highest peak of the land and spread her ashes on the across the land. So I think it is interesting though that I think we picked up at this point, rather than seeing Kratos at him with Faye and sort of Atreus being born, that we're picking up at this sort of specific moment. So what did you guys think of like the premise of the story and sort of the this plot?
I liked it. It's kind of to draw more comparisons, like Logan came out last year.
Yep.
And there's a lot of right potential in these stories where you take this old action badass hero kind of person, but I mean traumatic or like emotionally and in your psychologically, that actually being that would mess someone up a ton. So like stuff like Logan and God of War, just it's better to jump years into the future and show the impact that the previous like games or whatever had on them. So I feel like with this game, like if it wouldn't have been as emotional if it started like right after he came back, because it still wouldn't have hit Kratos yet. But going years later, where you can tell he kind of restarted his life and he regrets what he did in Greece and he wants his son to be better than him.
Yeah.
And so by starting the game when they did all that, it kind of skips that emotional journey and starts you off somewhere much more interesting than where he was at the end of God of War 3.
Right, and obviously, like throughout the game, like because we've there's this sort of backstory that we didn't see, like with Kratos and Faye. It kind of lets Atreus and Kratos and their conversations sort of peel back that history that we haven't really seen, and sort of develop their characters while they're doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, so the actual story itself, I once again it's just so different than the other ones. I mean, you have such a dichotomy between the two stories. I mean, the first three was, rage, kill gods, I must kill, yada yada yada, like kind of seemed a little childish almost. And this is just such a much more mature story than
now it's like what would have Kratos' dad thought of Kratos? Yeah. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. I mean, I know his dad's Ares or Zeus. But it's just kind of like that was kind of the point though, is that because Kratos was very childish in those times, now that he actually has an alive child, he's kind of like, oh God, is he going to become like me because he's a god? So that's kind of his thing, where because he was so childish and brash in his actions, he doesn't want his son, who's actually childish and brash, to make the same mistakes he did.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I give so much back to Cory Barlog. I mean, he was the director of God of War 2, which is like, so to show that he can go from that to this is, I mean, obviously God of War 2 is still a really great game. I'm not saying that it's not, but it is, like I said, more, I guess, quote unquote, immature than this one. And to see him go from that to that is just, it's awesome.
Definitely. And I think part of it too is he's been talking about his kid a lot too. And so my guess is he actually he's become a father in that time. And so I feel like he kind of took some elements from his real life and put it into the game and what it feels like as a parent.
Yeah. There's an interview with him, and there's that moment where they're going down an elevator and they're like drinking the alcohol or whatever. Yeah. And he does the thing, like really goofy thing. Mm-hmm. And I guess that was something that, like, in the interview, he said that was something that he took from real life, and he wasn't sure if they should put it in or not and stuff like that. And he decided that, we should put this in because it makes it feel like a more genuine, like, father-son thing. To him, it felt like that.
Definitely, like sharing your first drink. But one funny, this is a funny story from the game. There's a point in Tyr's Temple when you're in a puzzle and Kratos is drowning. And I just remember in that whole scene, like, it's very tense, and it went into the death cutscene because I didn't do it fast enough. but what happened was the button prompts still were activated in this death cutscene, and so Kratos is like, "No, Atreus," and Atreus is like, "Dad." But then as he was dying, he was like middle one and then drowned. Kratos' last words were middle one.
That puzzle was like really. I really did not like that puzzle. It was kind of
because it didn't make sense. You should have had to pull that middle one down.
Yeah,
but you didn't have to.
I died the first time I did that too. Like once I got after that was one of those things where it was like you kind of had to like trial by death where you kind of had to die to figure it out, and then like because that totally happened to me.
That was probably the funniest moment for me in the whole game.
I think for me, this story, like I just loved like sort of the simplicity of it and just how it like it was it gave enough of a motivation for Kratos and Atreus and sort of their journey, but then it left enough room to explore other aspects of the game, like their relationship, and then the various other and this is I think the next point we're going to touch on now is the other characters they sort of meet across this journey. So going into that, these are just a couple of the characters that sort of get introduced throughout the game. We have the Stranger, the World Serpent, the Witch in the Woods, Mimir, Brock and Sindri, and Modi and Magni. So maybe let's start with the Stranger, and just because he's one of the sort of the first big characters we get introduced with probably I would say the game's best boss fight. I would say. That first scene. Yeah.
I was blown away by that scene because just like the game's beautiful in general, but just that was the one because of course it's in the first like 30 minutes, so you're gonna put the most money into that one.
Yeah.
But when you're just punching each other and the trees are breaking, like that actually, for lack of like a better way of wording it, like it felt very next gen.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh, this is something that definitely could not have been done.
Oh, absolutely.
On PS3.
Yeah.
Just because you were kicked back into trees, the trees were breaking into multiple pieces. They were landing in the snow. The snow had imprints, and like and the frame rate was fine even on our regular PS4. So I was just amazed. By that fight, and even as and they get a little more traditional as you go on, but I was still impressed by all the
and I think
fights.
my one thing is I kind of wish that they only did maybe one other fight because you end up fighting him I think 3 times throughout the game, and I kind of wish that they just left it at either that or like one other fight.
The second time was more of a QTE. But
it was, but I think it got repetitive by the end because literally you spend a good portion of those fights just punching him in the face over and over again. It just got a little excessive. But I think that first fight with the Stranger and how he sort of comes looking for Kratos because he knows that he knows something about him and who he is, and I think it just really did an effective job of sort of kickstarting this sense of like danger that Kratos and Atreus are going to encounter on their journey.
And his story is also very. He was a character who, is shrouded in mystery, and then you learn not even through like the game directly, just through a conversation Kratos and Atreus have that he's Baldur.
Yeah.
And then they build on that, and you hear Freya has a son, and then you learn he's the son, and that she made it so he can't feel pain out of love, but now he resents her, and it's more of a commentary on parents who interfere too much. In their children's lives, and and I didn't even notice that at first, but then like at one point towards the end in the final boss fight where he's just like, you just kept on interfering, I was just like and then that clicked in my mind where I was like, holy crap, that's what this whole story's about. So he was a character I didn't really care. I didn't really like him in the beginning in like not in a bad way, but like you're just kind of like, oh, you're kind of the evil guy who's like the recurring villain, but then as you kind of learn that he's more. It kind of shows the tragedy of the gods because he's a very tragic warrior where he actually seems like he may have been a decent warrior beforehand, but then his mom did something to him out of love and it ended up ruining his life because he couldn't feel anything.
Right, yeah.
I thought this was like a pretty interesting take for his story too, because like again, like I've been reading a bit about it, and like he like the idea that Loki is the one who kills him, like, but he doesn't do it like with his hand in Norse mythology. He doesn't trick a person. He kind of basically like tells like controls a person or something like that. Like another person to do that, like use the mistletoe on Baldur. It's not Loki actually doing it. So I thought that was like kind of like, I thought like some of like the little things that they've done like throughout that story, like the little like their takes on Norse mythology, I thought were really interesting. And I thought this was one of them that I was like, oh, that's super weird, because they don't say that he's Loki at that point, but he's the one who kills him. And I feel like they like kind of hint at him being Loki like throughout this entire game.
Oh, you know, definitely that
him
reveal
like
in
shape
retrospect.
like when he's just like,
Yeah.
hey, can I be an animal? Like when he
Yeah.
when he
Right,
like,
yeah.
He's summoning wolves the whole game with
yeah
his magic
yeah.
powers.
Exactly.
And then as soon as they were like he's Loki. I mean, that was probably the first moment in a long time I've flipped my shit so majorly in a game. Like probably since spoilers for Arkham City, since Joker died, probably was the last time an ending made me go like holy shit at the top of my lungs. And like so, but I just remember, and especially because it was like same around. I don't want to spoil that movie, but it was around the same time as like Infinity War. So Loki had a very interesting month. So you know, I just remember that like they were when he's just like, oh yeah, those things, the murals, they called me Loki. I was just like, oh my god, everything makes sense now, and it's so great.
and it's
and
like
it puts
because
the whole game in perspective.
Just like cursory knowledge of knowing like, oh, Loki's like half giant or whatever, and like finding out his mom was a giant, like it didn't even click in my head for some reason. Yeah, and like it's like while they were walking down, he's like, oh, so I'm half giant and half god. I'm like, oh, where did Loki go? Like, where's Loki in this game? I didn't even like question it at first. And then he's like, oh, they were calling me Loki. I'm like, oh, this is crazy.
Those are the best. Those are the best reveals too, where they put enough clues to where you could come to that conclusion without them telling you in a way. And then the game finally tells you it's Loki, and then in your mind you can retroactively put it back together. Like and be like, oh yeah, they've been dropping. It wasn't something where they just kind of were writing the game as they went along, and like, oh yeah, now he's Loki. It was something where like, oh yeah, you can clearly see he's Loki from the like towards the beginning of the game. If you like actually look at stuff. If you knew anything about Norse mythology, even like him is asking about if he could change into wolves, or like him like killing a boulder with the mistletoe, it's like those are clear indicators that he's Loki. But if you didn't know anything about it, then like, and again, this goes to the point of like, I think a lot of people know Greek mythology more than Norse mythology. Like you would have no idea. And like, I think there's also a moment like during that boulder fight, at least for my like what I saw and read and stuff. Like there's like a tablet that he like smashes you through, or that you smash boulder through, and like it depicts the scene where you do like kill Boulder. And like it just tells you right then and there, like that's what's gonna happen.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's like there's like a bunch of like things like sprinkled in there that are telling you like who these people are and like what's gonna happen in the story. But like you would never know unless you were like real either into it or you were like really looking for it. Yeah. I thought that was like that's something that's really cool that they did with this game.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a kind of a low note to end it on too, where like usually, and I've seen some people voice disappointment that the game didn't really have a huge bombastic ending, but that was never really the point.
Yeah.
Where it was this personal journey all along, and it ended on a super huge reveal. And I mean, you did have that huge bombastic fight with Boulder, but that did kind of almost seem like it didn't seem like it would be the final boss. And then, then the game kind of just ends on this quiet note with this huge reveal, and almost kind of it's such a shocking reveal if you don't know it's coming at the end there, that I just remember you're just kind of walking down, and then the silence just kind of allows you to take it all in, and then you're like, oh, it's over. Now I want to play God of War 2, which probably won't be out for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. So I think since we've mentioned her a couple times before, and since she's tied to Baldur, let's talk about the Witch in the Woods, who is later revealed as Freya. Who Tomas, is she like she's like the fertility god of Norse mythology or something like that?
I believe so.
Yeah,
I believe so.
Isn't she? Is she the leader of the Valkyries? Am I wrong to think that?
No, that's Brunhild. I'm probably botching that name. Yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry. It's been a while since but the Valkyries are different. But yeah. But no, she's a significant god. I was not expecting that. I thought she was Athena at first, and then but then when they revealed she was Freya, I was like, oh yeah, that also makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think especially because, I mean, she stands out obviously because she's like the main. I mean, aside from Kratos and Atreus, from the wife and mother, like, you know, she's the main sort of female character in the game.
She kind of took a motherly role in the story.
Yeah, and I think that's like the most significant aspect of her is like as much as Kratos and Atreus is about like not only parenthood but fatherhood, then like she sort of reveals these layers of motherhood and, you know, gave this other side of you know, being a parental, kind of like on an opposite track from what Kratos and Atreus was, where with her and Baldur, where
she cared about her son. I don't want to say too much, but like she loved her son so much that she ended up ruining his life.
Right, which I mean may not necessarily be the best depiction of motherhood, and might be some problems with that. But overall, I thought
sexist.
I think overall, like, I mean, that is the one thing that sort of stood out to me is that, like, obviously God of War has not necessarily been the most female-friendly series ever. As like there have been some pretty really bad depictions of like we won't get into that too much.
Zero sex scenes in this game.
Yeah,
wait,
no, I think. I think with like I do appreciate like how they did make Freya a bit more like not just a sort of depiction of femininity like the previous games have had, and she was actually a fully formed character and had a storyline. And in the beginning, like they make her at first she's friendly, but obviously as the game goes on, there's sort of more secret layers to her character and why she gets involved with Kratos and Atreus.
And that story is super tragic too, because it actually. Kratos killing Baldur actually shows that Kratos has become a better person.
Yeah.
Because he cares about Freya, and so when Baldur's going to kill her, he's like, I'm not going to let you do that. I lost my wife and daughter, and so he doesn't want anybody he cares for to die. And even though he kind of resented her when he learned she was a god, she saved his child, and he has immense respect for her. So he's not going to let some like bratty god kill her. But then in the same thing, she almost wanted to die in that scenario. And then I love that scene too, where she's like, I'm going to take every horror in the world and like put it down on you for killing my son, where you're just like, oh shit. So it's like Kratos legitimately does something good and nice for somebody he cares about, and it still backfires on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ending where you're just like, I saved you. What the hell are you mad at me for?
Well, you did kill our child, which any parent,
right? Yeah.
No matter their relationship's going to be like if someone killed Kratos' kid, that wasn't him, he'd probably be pretty mad. I mean, he's mad at himself for killing his own children. So
yeah.
What's interesting is that later on in the game, if you try and go back to the witch's house, you can't get into her house anymore. You can go into that underground part, but you can't go into the house anymore.
Oh, interesting. I didn't do that.
Yeah. So that was one of those things where I'm like, are they? I'm sure it's possible, but they might be setting her up as a future villain. Probably.
It'll be she'll be in an interesting spot in the sequel or DLC or whatever they decide to do for this game.
Yeah.
Speaking of DLC. See, I need that. I need that in my life.
No, because that's the thing too. Why I think the kind of low key ending made it some people mad, because especially with how huge of an undertaking games are these days, it's going to be at least a year before we see like a large piece of DLC like Lost Legacy for the Uncharted games, or it's going to be like multiple years before we see a sequel. And so I think this story does leave you wanting more, and that's great. And I think that speaks volumes that you're like, I want to play God of War 5 as soon as this game ends.
Yeah, I mean, personally, like I appreciated how sort of how
it tells a complete story.
It's a complete experience, and I think like it gave me exactly what I wanted, and like I do want to see more of it, but like I think for what this game gave me, like I really appreciate that it was just like a complete story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say I do think benefit from like a side story DLC about someone. I definitely think it could benefit from that, and I personally want that, if I'm being honest.
Yeah,
I don't want any DLC.
We'll have to see if they actually do, because I know like Cory Barlog, I think he did an interview recently where he said he's not really interested in in doing that and all that. So
I understand that.
Yeah, let's quickly go through just a couple like the supporting characters that are in the game. So we have so we talked about Stranger, the Witch in the Woods. We've also got the World Serpent, who shows up as like one of the big sort of
time travel.
Yeah. We've got the World Serpent.
Kratos.
World Serpent.
Like
I would say
theory that's going on.
Yeah,
I love when you rode inside him. That was
a cool sequence.
I love how there's just like whole buildings with like working chains inside, though. It's like oh yeah, I'm gonna zip line down this building in the middle of the World Serpent. It's like, sure the acid isn't like melting away.
That's and then I think one of the other like significant characters of the game is Mimir, who you behead pretty early on in the game, and he accompanies you on most of your travels. I think he was just a great source of not only like I think as a great source of sort of explaining the lore of Norse mythology and all that stuff. But also just he was really good comic relief. Like he was just a nice foil for Kratos and Atreus throughout the game.
You need that too for such an exposition heavy character.
Yeah.
Like they kind of mask that exposition and humor,
yeah,
which works. And then I also love his like final line in the game. I know this is kind of getting into the ending, but like basically Ragnarok's kind of sped up at the end. But I just love when he come back and he's laying on the ground and he said, then you ask him like, oh, what were Brock and Sindri doing? And then he says, oh, they were he's like, they messed with me they took a bunch of measurements and then they began arguing about the weather. And you take that as like, oh, that's kind of a funny line. And then you go out and it's like, oh, yeah, no, they were arguing about like Ragnarok is what. So there's a lot of smart writing with him. Where it's kind of like, and you foreshadow stuff like it foreshadows Baldur being Freya's child too, where he just like, he can't say anything about Baldur. And then they reveal that. And so, the game, I just think it's one of the best written games I've played, where I think it does a great job at like setting everything up. And like especially making it so once the reveals happen you can look back and be like, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense within the context of story and was even teased. You just don't know until it happens.
And then like you mentioned that we have Brock and Sindri, who are the two like dwarven brothers that are the blacksmiths throughout the game, and I think they're also another kind of good pair of like sort of comic relief characters that you see. And I especially love that the game gives the explanation of how they appear in all these different realms, because they're basically just like time hopping between the different areas.
I do feel like that we don't know everything about him too, because Sindri clearly knew Faye. Like that first time you meet him, he's kind of like, oh, I made that axe for a woman I really like. So I do almost feel that when she died, she could have almost told them like, oh yeah, follow my husband and son. So that's a reveal I could see coming in future games, where it's like they kind of know who they are and what they're doing. But I do love that time though when Atreus just like freaks out when he's kind of a cocky god and he's just like, why are you being so petty and everything to Sindri? And then it actually causes them to get back together. So it's actually something good came from like Atreus being a dick.
Yeah.
That was great.
And then the last sort of pair of characters I had on my list here was Modi and Magni, who we come across later as a boss fight, and I think they're they're an interesting sort of boss fight because you're fighting the two of them at the same time, and
that was Dark Souls inspired.
That was it felt very very Dark Souls, playing through that. All right, I think
and Troy Baker and Nolan, they're just in everything now.
I didn't realize
was that Troy Baker and Nolan North as Modi?
Yes, it was.
Oh my god, that's perfect.
I didn't realize that until like way after I played the game, and I looked like a couple days ago on the Wikipedia page for it, and I was like, oh shit, that was Troy Baker and Nolan North.
Yeah. That was really clever casting.
Yeah, that was good.
I heard they were in the game, and I before it came out, I heard they were in the game. I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna be going through this game, trying to find them, even if there's some small little NPC that you can barely talk to. I'm going to find these guys. And then I immediately, as soon as Magni and Modi came in, I'm like, oh, that's them. That's totally them. I can hear their voices.
I do feel like they were a little underdeveloped. They were just kind of there for the boss fight. I do like I forgot which one you kill, but whichever one survives afterwards. I love when he comes down and he's like, oh, I got the hammer or whatever, and everybody just thinks it's because his brother's dead, when he's like, oh no, I actually earned this, and you killed my brother. And so that puts them in a really weird scenario. Right, but they don't really, because the game's still kind of separate from those gods and everything, like because the game doesn't really delve into Asgard. Most like Baldur, Magni, Modi, and Freya and the World Serpent are really the only gods you see in the game. And what's his name? Mimir. So I do feel like they could have been developed slightly better, but their purpose was served in the story.
Right.
Yeah.
And they had a fun boss fight.
Yeah, I think their deaths are like something to open up for like obviously there's that surprise ending of like of Thor, but I also think it opens up for other characters like Sif to come in. Like,
oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
Like,
you will probably see a lot of Thor characters in the next game.
Yeah, so I think that opens up for that, because maybe they could go again with. It'd kind of be repeating like the whole motherly thing and killing her sons or whatever, but like that could work too, where a boss fight might be Sif in the next game or something like that.
Yeah,
I could definitely see that now that you bring that up.
Yeah. So I think the one of the main story things that I think we should probably touch on is just sort of this idea of how Kratos is kind of confronting his past throughout the whole game. And obviously I think the biggest scene that sort of relates to that is when he gets the Blades of Chaos, about I guess halfway through the game, somewhere around there.
I'd 2/3.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Low
and
point.
It's like basically like the most like sort of literal and figurative sort of image of him coming to terms with his past. But even before that, I think it might have been before that. Was it when you go into Tyr's like treasure vault and you find the vase that has him on it with like, you know, the Blades of Chaos, and after you killed all those people? I think that might have been like a little bit before that.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, I think it was just interesting how they sort of touched on that idea of how like and this is also reflected through his relationship with Atreus and how he's kind of like, you know, and also there were other points too where like God of War character Athena and Zeus sort of appear as like visions from God of War 3 as sort of reminders of Kratos kind of escaping this past of his.
I love how they use the worst graphics too to kind of shield it as a in the thing. I love that when it's kind of
were they using just
I was
like
using
smart. God of War 3 like just the actual graphics from
I like that because I'm like, oh, it's an illusion, so it makes sense, and it saves money. So yeah, no, I thought that was a really good thing. I mean, it's just anything is. I think it puts Kratos in an interesting part as a parent because, you know, you want to shield your children from like worst parts or mistakes you made in the past to make sure they don't want to do that. So I feel like Kratos was in a position where, because of how horrible he was, he didn't want his son to be exposed to any of that because he's trying to shield him from becoming the same thing. And in his mind, he thought the best way to do that would be to just kind of shut himself off and never tell him anything. But then like you have constant like Freya and Mimir telling him like, no, you have to tell Atreus because I mean, I know, I love that line. You hate gods, and so your son thinks you hate him because like he has such a hatred for the gods, so he technically hates his son. And when they said that, I was just, that made me feel super bad because you can tell Kratos loves his son, but because he's so hesitant to gods and his son's a god, he's kind of pulled back from his son. So it creates this, it was a super interesting dynamic with some great writing, and it's kind of him. And then Kratos finally, like, for such a manly character, he finally mans up and tells his son, like, okay, here's what I did, in a couple points in the story. And I think those were some of the more powerful scenes where like and they don't even play it up too much. Like they're just kind of on a boat or like about to pull out on a boat, and then Kratos is just like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a Greek god, you're a god too. And it was a very reserved way of doing that, but it made sense within the story.
Yeah, I think even when like towards the end, when Kratos does kind of like peel back those layers a little bit and reveals to Atreus, like, you know, yes, I was this god, I did these things, blah blah blah. Like, you know, it took him this whole game to sort of have the courage to do that and you know, share these things with his son.
The thing is, though, Atreus still doesn't know he killed his wife and daughter. So that's
there's that. Yeah, there's some. There are some things that he has.
I was expecting hidden, that was something I was expecting for them to reveal them to this game, and then when they didn't, even at the end, there's the payoff with the hand on the shoulder thing when they're in Jotunheim.
Yeah,
because like he finally has his hand on the son's shoulder, and like but well, what was I going for again? Crap, I just blinked. Yeah. Sorry, I blinked.
No, you're good.
What was I talking about?
Let's move over now
to the. Sorry.
No, it's good. Let's move on now towards the ending and sort of discuss how the game sort of ends, and also the secret ending also that you can go back and find if you move after on. So the main ending, obviously there's the whole boss fight between Baldur and Freya where you end up killing Baldur. Freya seems very revenge filled and trying, you know, as we said before, maybe they're trying to set her up as the villain for the next game. But
plot twist, Freya turns into Kratos later.
Basically, yeah. She's like, she becomes that chick from Darksiders 3, like the female version of Kratos.
One complaint I do just remembered too is I didn't like in this game anytime anyone had to yell. It always sounded very forced. Like when Freya was yelling no at the end, and then Kratos yelled like Freya at that one point. The delivery was pretty bad on it, but yeah. Okay, that was just a nitpick. But, okay.
But yeah, basically, you reach the summit, and obviously that's where we learn that Atreus is Loki as one of the big reveals. Yeah, and then they spread his ashes. There's a very like touching fatherly son moment as they sort of share in that experience. But then we also get a lot of interesting things, I think, that sort of reveal where the next, you know, if when we get a next God of War, that reveal where things are going. Like we see the bodies of the dead giants and all that. So what did you guys think about like the ending and where it left off?
There's that when they're looking at all the stuff on the wall of like like, you know, it's Loki, like where it says Loki and stuff like that. Like there's that last thing that Kratos is looking at, and it's like the weird thing where like Atreus is like puking the what I think is
the world serpent.
Most people think is the world serpent because it's known that like he gives birth to it, which also like goes back to the thing where the world serpent's like, oh hey, you look familiar kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So like that's weird because I'm wondering like how they're going to do that, because like again like this was something I joked about, but a lot like people are theorizing that like Kratos is the world serpent or something like that.
I think there were theories that Kratos might be Tyr or something like that too. Like there's like a couple different. I
believe Tyr is the god of war in
Norse mythology.
In Norse mythology.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's more the point of Tyr was to show like because Kratos, the god of war, is usually seen and depicted as a very violent character.
Yeah.
In mythology, like Ares is kind of a dick. Kratos is a huge dick. And so, but when they went from for Tyr, they were showing, oh yeah, you can be a god of war and still be benevolent.
And they say that too. They're like, oh yeah, still like. So
it shows Kratos can be a better person, even with his circumstances. So I don't think he's Tyr but I just think Tyr is the standard he's working towards.
Yeah, I agree with that. But yeah, like I'm just wondering like where they go with that. Like, you know, how are they going to explain like Kratos dying? Because I think obviously it's going to happen. And it might happen in the next game. I think you guys are right in saying that like maybe you are Atreus in like the third one, like in the third game that they probably will have out. I would say. Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was like super a real interesting thing.
One inconvenient thing about the ending there, the only reason because Atreus decided to put his hand on the wall as he was walking out. Like they could have just walked through there and Atreus couldn't have touched anything. They wouldn't have found anything else.
I mean, I think the most interesting thing, like we kind of touched upon, is how like there might be some kind of idea of sort of history repeating itself or some kind of cyclical, like, you know, because I think the biggest thing with that is the whole the painting of Loki on the wall with the world serpent coming out of his mouth and sort of birthing the world serpent. I think there was something they mentioned about how the world serpent came about from Ragnarok, I think, or something like that. I don't remember exactly.
There's some weird time travel stuff.
Then also because like with Thor, well, I guess we're gonna get into this very shortly, but like with Thor coming and, you know, the sort of return of Ragnarok, that there's sort of this like weird cyclical, and even like the whole idea, like I think it's reflected with the world serpent too, how the world serpent like eats itself and how there's like this cycle of these events repeating itself.
Yeah, I think that. So it's like it's known that like and they say it in the game, it's just like the world serpent like hates Thor. Yeah, that's a thing, and I think that's like a personification of like Atreus like hating Thor, and I think Thor is the person that kills Kratos.
Yeah, I think that could be. So actually, like since we mentioned that, I guess we can just get straight into the secret ending. So basically, if you after the sort of main ending to the story, if you go back to Kratos and Atreus's house, that plays out with a secret ending where Thor shows up. So what do you guys think of this ending?
I don't think the game needed it. I feel I think it was. I mean, I don't want to be a downer, but like, it teases the next game, and like I said, that's what pains me, that the next entry isn't going to come for 2 or 3 years, because it's like you see that, and then you're just like, and they don't even really fully reveal Thor, but they just like they build this up, and then nothing kind of comes from it.
So we don't really know if Chris Hemsworth isn't in this game.
I do think that.
I just thought how the scene played out was kind of funny, because like they do the whole thing where Kratos and Atreus, like they get back to the house and Kratos is like, "Boy, sleep," and then they cut to that title card that says like years later, and they literally look the same. They look like they look like they slept for about 20 minutes and they woke up and Thor just showed up.
And then they wake up and look exactly the same.
Yeah, they look like exactly the same. So I thought that scene.
They didn't pay him enough to model a teenage.
It was a cool scene. I just thought the execution of it was a little funky, especially because Thor looked cool, but I just thought it was kind of silly how like his cloak reveals back and he has his hammer holstered to his side. He's like he has the thing. He looks like he's like about to pull a revolver out of his. Old Western.
It's just after that, it's like Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah.
Thor is October.
Yeah, but it was a cool scene, and obviously it kind of sets up where the next game is going. And I guess with that topic, where do you guys sort of see the God of War franchise going from how this ending plays out?
I think,
and from this game in general, like where do you kind of see this game going?
I think the beauty of the way it ended is that it could go a number of different ways. Is that we don't really have, I mean, sure, we have a couple clues on where it could go, but we don't have like one solid hint besides the besides that one panel at the end as to where it's going to go. Personally, that's personally how I feel.
I think I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I think there's certain characters that are fairly obvious, or like a good chance that they'll make it in there, and that has to go with like obviously I think there's Thor. Like I mentioned Sif. I think Sif is another person because Modi and Magni are dead. I think the second game would also be like where we'd see Odin too.
Yeah,
I think we get at least that might be what the Thor reveal for the next game.
This game had a very narrow scope with the story. I mean, it was still broad, but like it was very focused on like Kratos and Atreus' journey. And now that I think that's complete, in the next game it'll kind of turn to Asgard. And I think even if we don't get a fight them all, we'll probably meet Odin and many of the other and Thor. Definitely Thor.
We'll definitely see Thor.
Thor's the main guy in the next game, most likely.
Yeah.
But, and I think it'll probably follow a similar structure to like the previous trilogy in a way, where it'll kind of be like we'll get more of it in the second one, and then the third one will just be like all out, like everybody's there.
I'm hoping that they don't do that. Like I think it'd be good to kind of keep it a little bit more like.
Well,
keep it small.
Loki's responsible for Ragnarok. So the third, it'd make most sense for once Ragnarok comes for the third game to be Loki taking on all the Greek gods and causing Ragnarok, but from a protagonist perspective, because usually it's kind of seen as like kind of this villainous world-ending thing, but they might portray Ragnarok as like, oh, the gods kind of deserve it in this universe.
Something that I'm wondering, because like it's like Loki's pretty big like in Norse mythology or whatever, and he's in all these stories with Thor, or like all these people, and I'm wondering like if there's some way, like just a small, like it was for like a hot minute where I was like, oh, I wonder if they do this is with if they like kind of like do like a Men in Black with his mind and kind of just erase his memory. and like I don't know if there's something like that in Norse mythology where they do that.
That'd be kind of cheap. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be, and that's the thing. Like I don't know if I'd like that.
The storytelling's too smart, I think, for them to do that. But
and I totally
I see where you're coming from now.
But like to kind of insert him into this stuff, and then like to have Atreus' own trilogy later on, and like maybe like the magic wears off or something like that, and then he knows it, and then he kind of goes, and this is why he becomes this like mischievous person, because he just wants to like mess with people the entire time because they kind of screw him over. Like I don't know.
Like I said, it's portraying Loki from a protagonist perspective, because he's usually are you clapping, Tanner?
No.
It usually portrays him from a he's more villainous, like especially if you're familiar with the Marvel, you're used to him being the villain in the story. So this one I think's going into the future to portray his mischief as like, oh no, I'm actually like giving the gods their comeuppance and stuff like that. And I feel like that's kind of the route it's going to go, where it's going to paint Loki in a more heroic, maybe not heroic, but a more like protagonist kind of perspective instead of antagonist.
I think they'll pull what they did with Boulder, in which like you understand where kind of thing.
I think I'll be interested to see gameplay wise where the next game goes, because obviously like this game did such, I think this game and a lot of the reason why people are responding to it so well and why it's getting such acclaim is because it is such a drastic departure from the previous God of War games, and how it completely shifted the gameplay, the storytelling, and all that. And I just wonder like if the next game, like I'm sure it'll be great like regardless, but just, you know, if people will respond to it in the same way, given that I'm assuming it'll probably just kind of be more of the same and kind of build on this as a foundation, like, but not maybe make as many drastic changes compared to what we saw between this and God of War 3.
Yeah, definitely. I think like we said, we voiced a couple complaints with the gameplay earlier. They can pick those up and somehow make it, maybe pull the camera back a bit. This is just a theory, and like kind of like make it so it's easier to attack stuff on your sides and in the air. Really, they just need to tweak the system a little bit, maybe make it flow a little better or whatever. Like whatever complaints people have about it right now. Like I feel like it's a system that works really well right now, but it does have a couple of noticeable but like workable issues. So if they could turn those issues into like, if they could fix those, I think that it'd be like great for a sequel.
I think if they do something, and I know we've been comparing this to Dark Souls a lot, but like I know if they did like how Dark Souls, going from Dark Souls to Bloodborne, where it's very similar, but it's just a little bit snappier. Like I think that would be really good for the game.
But I mean, Kratos is old and like big, so that's kind of why the gameplay's slower. But if they do shift it to Atreus, I could see.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think they could maybe go. I guess we're kind of we're gonna see this with Last of Us Part 2, where we're getting an older Ellie, where like maybe they'll time jump a little bit, and Atreus will be a little older, so he'll have a little more skills at his disposal, or like maybe even play as him. I think that might be cool too if they switch that and maybe let you play as him in some sections. But yeah,
I feel like that would be the only way to really change it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that would definitely seem like a good way for them to go if they went in that direction. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like I went into like when they revealed that there was a new God of War coming to PS4, like I was definitely kind of like, ugh, like I was like I got very burnt out on God of War after playing all the previous games, and just to see the change of direction that they took with this game was so refreshing. And just after playing this game, I really can't say enough about how an amazing job they did and just what this game came out to be. Like it easily is one of the best PS4 games I think that's come out in this generation. I think
it is the best PS4 game to come out. Like I don't like, and I have my reservations on it, but like I'm trying to just think of like the game. Like I mean more exclusives, because I personally think Doom's the best game to ever come out this generation. but besides that, like as like an exclusive, like I think it's the best PS4 exclusive.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's up there for me. Sorry, Tanny, go ahead.
Well, wouldn't Shadow of the Colossus technically? I cannot. That's a remake.
I mean, I think if I had to pick, I'd probably say like this, Bloodborne, like some of like those are like absolutely like top tier PS4 games. I think for me, and this is way up there.
Yeah.
Where's the love for Uncharted?
I did like Uncharted 4 a lot. I think I had issues with some, especially because Uncharted 4 was very long, and I think it needed some trimming. And I actually like with God of War, I think it maybe could have used a little bit of trimming, just because there were some sections I think later on that get a little repetitive, and some gameplay things I didn't really love. But overall, I think just overall, like as consistently, like this game, just I think the production value of it is just so top notch and just exceptional in every way.
Did you guys play in performance or did you play in?
I played on a regular PS4, so I didn't have any of that.
I did too.
So I'm the only one who played on a 4K TV.
Yeah.
And Michael's eyes just bled as he played this game, so it was like
the game still looked like, I can't imagine how good it looks on a Pro.
No, yeah, on a Pro, like I did both of them, and like I tried them both out to see how it would work, and it's so weird because I did it in like the graphics mode first, and that's how I played the majority of it because I want to take advantage of what I bought. But yeah, like
really
when I did but when I did the performance mode, even though it steps it down to like 1080p, it still looks great, and it like it kind of dips a little bit. It's a little weird, but it was so jarring to having like play that in 60 frames per second. It was so weird.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like that would be the weirdest thing is going to 60
and that. We got people on their keyboards right now be like, how can you play any lower than
yeah. Only 120 frames per second.
Yeah.
My God.
Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up now, and we'll finish up our discussion since we went over a ton of stuff related to this game. But thank you everyone for listening and listening to us talk about Boy and Kratos. Kratos. Like we have to get at least a couple boys in there before we end. So thank you guys for listening to our spoiler cast, and obviously there's still plenty of God of War stuff that you can read about that's going up on the site if you just go over to DualShockers.com. As always, follow us on social. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as @DualShockers, YouTube as DSTV Originals, Twitch as DualShockers Live, SoundCloud I think we're DualShockers. I hope because that's where this is going up. And just a couple of things, if you want to read more God of War stuff, you can read our review from Giuseppe, which gave the game a pretty glowing 10 out of 10 score, which are not very often on the site. So it's a good review to read.
Could have been better.
And you can also read Logan Moore, one of our other staff writers who couldn't join us for this. He wrote a really great editorial just kind of talking about 5 things that he's hoping to see from the series moving forward, and some stuff that we kind of touched on, but some really interesting other points as well. And with that, I think we'll leave off there. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you around next time for the next Spoilercast.